The ship's cargo was untouched. The food was still cooking on the stove. The crew's personal belongings, clothing, pipes, boots, money, were exactly where they had been left. 10 people had been aboard the brigantine Mary Celeste when she departed New York Harbor on November 7th, 1872. When she was found adrift 5 weeks later, not one of them was anywhere on the vessel. The lifeboat was missing. The navigation equipment was gone. But the ship herself was in nearly perfect sailing condition, making steady headway under partial sail toward the Strait of Gibraltar. Why 10 people, including a woman and a 2-year-old child, would abandon a seaworthy vessel in the middle of the Atlantic and vanish without a trace has never been explained. But the physical evidence found aboard that ship in December of 1872 would suggest something had happened in the final hours before that lifeboat left, something that the historical record has never been able to fully account for. On the morning of November 7th, 1872, a 270-ton American brigantine registered out of New York prepared to depart Pier 50 on the East River, bound for Genoa, Italy, with a cargo of 1,701 barrels of commercial-grade alcohol. The man responsible for that voyage was 37-year-old Benjamin Spooner Briggs, a Massachusetts-born sea captain with more than a decade of command experience across multiple vessels, a man described by his contemporaries as sober, deeply religious, and meticulous in the management of his ships. Briggs had made a deliberate choice to bring his family on this crossing. His wife, 30-year-old Sarah Elizabeth Briggs, and their 2-year-old daughter, Sophia Matilda, joined him aboard. Their 7-year-old son, Arthur, remained at home in Massachusetts with his grandmother. The crew numbered 7, a first mate, second mate, cook, and 4 sailors, drawn from a mix of American and European maritime backgrounds. None of them, by any record that survives, had expressed concern about the voyage. In a letter written to his mother on November 3rd, 4 days before departure, Briggs wrote that the ship was in good shape and that he hoped for a pleasant voyage. The Mary Celeste departed New York on schedule. The weather in the North Atlantic that November was unsettled but not unusual for the season. Briggs planned a standard transatlantic crossing, approximately 2,700 nautical miles to the port of Genoa. The last entry in the Mary Celeste's log was dated November 25, 1872. At that point, the ship was recorded as being approximately 6 miles northwest of the Azores island of São Marcos. After November 25th, the log goes silent. What happened between that last log entry and the moment a passing ship spotted the Mary Celeste drifting, unmanned, 10 days later, is the question that has consumed maritime historians for over 150 years. Before examining what was found aboard, it is important to understand what had changed at sea in the 10 days since that final log entry, because the physical condition of the Mary Celeste when she was discovered defied almost every explanation investigators initially reached for. On December 4th, 1872, the British brigantine Dei Gratia, sailing from New York to Gibraltar with a cargo of petroleum, spotted a vessel approximately 6 miles off the port bow, behaving erratically, yawing in the wind, sails improperly set, making irregular headway. The captain of the Dei Gratia, 43-year-old David Reed Morehouse, recognized the vessel immediately. He had dined with Captain Briggs in New York just days before the Mary Celeste departed. The two men knew each other well. Morehouse sent his first mate, Oliver DeVoe, and 2 sailors across by lifeboat to investigate. What DeVoe found when he climbed aboard would be reported in detail during the subsequent Admiralty inquiry in Gibraltar, and those details have survived in full. The ship was deserted. DeVoe conducted a thorough search of every compartment. The crew's quarters contained personal belongings undisturbed: clothing, sea boots, tobacco pipes, and money. The captain's cabin held Sarah Briggs's jewellery, a sewing machine, and a child's toy. The ship's logbook was present and accounted for, as were the chronometer, sextant, and ship's register. The forward hatch and the main hatch were both open. Approximately 3.5 feet of water had accumulated in the hold, a meaningful but not critical quantity for a vessel of the Mary Celeste's size. The bilge pump had been disassembled. The compass binnacle had been knocked over and the compass destroyed. The ship's single lifeboat, normally stored on deck across the main hatch, was gone. 2 of the 3 pumps were functional. The hull was sound. The cargo was intact. 9 of the sails were set, 5 were in poor condition, but the vessel was entirely capable of continued sailing. DeVoe later testified at the Admiralty inquiry in Gibraltar that in his professional judgment, the Mary Celeste showed no signs of having been struck by a severe storm, boarded by pirates, or involved in a fire. The ship, in his assessment, had been abandoned in a hurry by people who left believing they would not be returning. One additional detail from DeVoe's testimony has never been satisfactorily explained. A length of rope was found trailing behind the ship, frayed at its free end, as though something had been attached to it and had pulled away under great force. Up to this point, every piece of physical evidence had suggested a crew that left deliberately and in haste. What the Gibraltar Admiralty inquiry uncovered next began to complicate that picture in ways that have never been resolved. The Admiralty's appointed inspector, a man identified in court records as Surveyor John Austin, conducted a detailed physical inspection of the Mary Celeste in Gibraltar Harbour in December of 1872. His written findings were submitted to the inquiry in full. Austin's report noted several details that immediately concerned the inquiry's Attorney General, a man identified in court records only by his role, who aggressively pursued a theory of foul play throughout the proceedings. The railing on the port bow had cuts in the wood, 2 cuts, approximately 1.25 inches long and 1 inch deep, which Austin concluded were not consistent with normal wear or storm damage, but appeared to have been made deliberately with a sharp instrument. A stain was found on one of the cabin walls. Initial suggestions held it was blood. The inquiry arranged for a chemical analysis. The analysis returned negative. It was not blood. A sword was recovered from beneath the captain's bunk. It appeared to show a reddish stain along the blade. This also tested negative for blood. The Attorney General at the inquiry pushed hard for a piracy or mutiny finding, suggesting the Dei Gratia's crew might themselves have been involved. The timing was suspicious to him. Morehouse and Briggs had dined together days before departure. The 2 ships were sailing the same route, and the Dei Gratia stood to collect a substantial salvage award for bringing in the Mary Celeste. The inquiry awarded salvage, but at a fraction of the amount normally granted, an implicit expression of suspicion without a formal finding. No charges were ever filed. No conclusion was ever formally reached. Now the global open loop closes, because the most disturbing detail of the entire investigation was not found on the ship in 1872. It emerged 17 years later on another continent from a man who claimed to have been there. In 1884, a short story appeared in a British publication titled The Cornhill Magazine. The author was a then unknown 25-year-old physician named Arthur Conan Doyle. The story, titled J. Habakkuk Jeffson's Statement, presented itself as a first-person survivor account of the Mary Celeste disappearance, complete with invented names, invented motives, and an invented sequence of events involving a racial conspiracy and a mass murder. The story was fiction, explicitly so in the minds of those who knew the facts. But Doyle got one crucial detail wrong in a way that would haunt the case for decades. He changed the ship's name from Mary Celeste to Marie Celeste, and this error propagated through nearly every subsequent popular account of the case, embedding a layer of misinformation into the historical record that persists in some sources to this day. But Doyle's story was not the confession. In 1913, more than 40 years after the Mary Celeste vanished her crew into the Atlantic, a man named Abel Fosdyke published an account in a British magazine claiming to have been a secret passenger aboard the ship during its final voyage. Fosdyke claimed that Captain Briggs had constructed a small platform over the bowsprit for his daughter Sophia to play on, and that the entire crew had gathered at the bow to watch a swimming race between crew members. He claimed the platform gave way, that everyone fell into the sea, and that sharks killed those who did not drown immediately. The problem with Fosdyke's account is significant. No record of Abel Fosdyke as a passenger or as any person connected to the Mary Celeste exists in any document from 1872. The manifest does not list him. The Admiralty inquiry made no reference to him. His story was not the last. In 1926, a man named Lee Kay published a deathbed confession allegedly from a crew member named John Pemberton, claiming the crew had gotten drunk on the alcohol cargo and the captain had been murdered. No corroborating evidence for this account exists either. Evidence and theories. Three explanations have received the most serious treatment from historians and maritime investigators. The first is alcohol vapor explosion. The 1,701 barrels of commercial-grade alcohol aboard the Mary Celeste included a number of barrels constructed from red oak, a wood known to be more porous than white oak and capable of allowing vapor seepage. The theory holds that a buildup of alcohol vapor in the hold could have produced a non-destructive explosion, a concussive pressure event that blew the hatches open, left no fire or structural damage, but convinced the crew the ship was about to explode. The evidence that contradicts it: the cargo arrived in Genoa when the ship was later sailed there by the Dei Gratia crew with 9 of the barrels empty, but no evidence of explosion or fire was documented by the Gibraltar surveyor. This theory remains the most widely accepted among serious maritime researchers, but it cannot be proven. The second theory is waterspout or seaquake. The area of the Atlantic where the Mary Celeste was sailing, between the Azores and the Strait of Gibraltar, is geologically active. A submarine seaquake could have produced violent, localized shaking with no visible surface storm, terrifying a crew unfamiliar with the sensation and producing false depth soundings that suggested the ship was taking on catastrophic amounts of water. The evidence that contradicts it: no seismic event in that area on that date is documented in any record. The third is piracy or crew mutiny. The Attorney General at the 1872 Gibraltar inquiry pursued this theory aggressively, citing the Dei Gratia's salvage interest and the anomalous cuts in the ship's railing. The cuts, he argued, were consistent with a boarding axe. The frayed rope trailing behind the ship could have been a line to which the lifeboat was briefly attached before the crew was forced into it. The evidence that contradicts it: no member of the Dei Gratia crew was ever charged, the blood analysis returned negative, and no body of any of the 10 people aboard the Mary Celeste was ever recovered. 10 people entered the Atlantic in November of 1872. None of them came home. Verdict and outro. The Gibraltar Admiralty inquiry of 1872 reached no formal conclusion as to the cause of the Mary Celeste crew's disappearance. The Dei Gratia crew collected a salvage award of approximately £1,700, roughly one-fifth of the vessel and cargo's estimated value, and no charges were ever filed against them. The Mary Celeste herself continued sailing under a succession of owners for the next 12 years, changing hands 17 times in that period, before being deliberately wrecked off the coast of Haiti in January of 1885 in what investigators concluded was an insurance fraud scheme. Her final captain was convicted. The bodies of Benjamin Briggs, Sarah Briggs, Sophia Matilda Briggs, and the 7 crew members of the Mary Celeste have never been found. To this day, no official authority has established what compelled 10 people to leave a seaworthy ship and disappear into the Atlantic Ocean on a November morning in 1872.
Thank you for watching this one through to the end. If you want to see more stories like this one, hit subscribe. We open a new file every other day. Every file in the vault has a story. We'll see you at the next one.